Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Roll call, please, Jenny.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Here.
Charlie Schneider.
Here.
Mark Hillman.
Here.
Angie Skillings. Here. Carl Palmer.
Here.
Abe Smith.
Here.
Dominique Stewart. Rachel Henderson.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum to conduct business. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And our mission statement: the school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. On to the agenda order. Anybody have any changes, recommended changes, or thoughts? Nothing? All right. So on to recommendations and accommodations. Tanya Huseby, come on up.
For the last time.
So for the district would like to recognize Tanya Huseby for her dedicated service to the school district and the community as a member of the Board of Education. For how many times? 3?
3 times.
Nice.
Yeah.
Congrats. All right, on to community communications. We have one this evening, Mrs. Pillman.
My name is Joseph Hillman, and my address is 235 3rd Avenue East, Apartment 5, in Annapolis, Wisconsin, and that is in the Menomonie School District. Dr. Zalowski, Chairman Schneider, and members of the board. Laura Perry is a beautiful young woman. When she was in her early 20s, she became disillusioned with her female gender. Sadly, she began to believe the lie that she could change herself into a man and then she would be happy. She began to dress in a more masculine way, cut her hair, and methodically took steps to try to change herself into a man, all against the wise counsel of her parents. She took hormone therapy and actually began to have some surgeries done to remove female parts. She called herself Jake. She moved away from her hometown and pretended she was a man. She was believing a lie and would do her great harm. Here in the Menomonie School District, some educators like to start telling young children that they might not be who they think they are. This is a lie. It is unkind and hurtful. The truth is that no one can change the gender they are. In fact, it is rebellion against our Creator to imagine that you might be able to. Lies only lead to harmful choices. Children need to be told the truth about human sexuality. Our culture may be feeding them a lie, but in our schools, we want our educators to teach only the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. As we point children to the truth, they will form healthy, happy homes where healthy, happy children can be born and grow to maturity. It is not easy to speak truth to our children. Our culture and their own fleshly desires are trying to coerce them into thinking that whatever feels good is good. It is not. Human sexuality, handled with maturity, character, and self-control, is a beautiful thing. Yet the marriage union comes with boundaries. It is between one man and one woman, and within the boundary of a lifetime commitment, one to the other. That is a place where children can flourish. Laura Perry eventually learned the truth, that she could never change into a man. The whole process caused her much unhappiness. Now she is a married woman, but she can never birth children. Some things cannot be repaired. But her story is strong and clear to those of us who love our school children. Believe the truth, never try to change your sex, do not meddle with the Creator's perfect design for marriage and human flourishing. Thank you.
I apologize, I neglected to read the disclaimer, if you will. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers during community communications do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the school district of the Menomonie area, nor do they reflect the official policies of the SDMA. Moving on to approving the personnel consent agenda.
I move we approve.
Second.
So, motion by Carl and second by Rachel. Any discussion you want to tee it up, Joe?
Just to say that we have 4 new hires and no resignations, so we're happy to see that.
Thank you to the HR team and all the building leaders.
Amy?
I thought there was a math teacher that had resigned, I saw it in the staff report, and I didn't know if we were accepting that or if we already accepted that report.
There's some contractual agreements that need to happen,
Okay,
so that when that takes place, then we'll bring that forward.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, let's go ahead and vote. Okay, motion passes on a 7-0. And on to the action agenda, approve the year-end budget transfers.
Excuse me, I'll make a motion to approve that.
I'll second.
Motion by Angie, second by Amy.
Board members, last meeting we talked quite a bit about this, and this year-end transfer process is something that the district has used year after year after year. And what it does is allows us to expend funds in accordance with state law by July 30th. These funds are then expended and counted as expendable funds in the 2021-2022 budget, which then allows the district to capture additional state aid in the following year budget. As noted in the previous meeting, the audit actually just started today. So Leah and her team have been working with the auditors to try to narrow in on a recommendation. Especially this year with all the different grants related to the pandemic, it's more complicated than it probably has ever been. So I appreciate the work that Leah and her team have done to narrow in on a recommendation. And at this time, you can see it was added this afternoon at the bottom of the description. It is recommended that the board approve an additional budget transfer of up to $1.9 million to be made to Fund 46 by SDMA Director of Business Services, Leah Theater, and again, that would be by July 30th, 2022. The reason why we're asking for a motion or approval of up to $1.9 million is because there's more work that Leah needs to do with the auditors this week. It's not the end of the world if we overspend our budget, but we would like to end in the black if possible. So we think 1.9 is probably about where we're at, but we do want to make sure that the auditors go through all the grant transfers and all the claims to try to get as accurate as a recommendation as possible. Any questions?
Anyone? All right, let's go ahead and vote. And that passes on a 7-0 vote as well. On to approving updates to the SDMA strategic plan.
I'll make a motion to approve those.
Second.
Motion by Angie, second by Mark. Any discussion?
Would you like me to go?
Yeah, let's.
So there's a lot to go through here, and again, like last time, the board went through the strategic plan, actually for the last few meetings, and at the last meeting, the board directed the administration to come back with recommendations for how the plan could be updated and modified to meet the current state of our school district. So in the draft that the board has, I want to point out a few things. First of all, the strike-through language, that's something the board had asked for a few meetings back. The strike-throughs are still in there. Those are items that have been completed. But please note that there are some items that are in yellow highlight. Those items are ongoing, and there are some of our goals that have been completed, but they're goals that require ongoing attention. So if it's struck through and highlighted, that just means that it was something that would be continued to be worked on, even though the goal has been met. Other items that are simply highlighted, those items that are not struck through, those items have not been completed yet. But if they're yellow highlighted, that means that they are being recommended for continued action. There are a few items in blue, which I think we wanted to make sure to point out to the board, and if the board has any differing direction, we would like to know that. For instance, in Pillar 2, one of the measurables was to increase matriculation to 2- and 4-year colleges by at least 0.5% annually. We all know that the labor market has changed significantly. We also know that the pandemic has impacted plans for pretty much everybody. And we also know that the cost of higher education has changed significantly. So we just wanted to call that out. It still is included in the plan that's in front of the board tonight, but we wanted to make sure that that's something the board would still like to have in there. There's also one down towards the bottom in Pillar 5. We do have plans in our strategic plan for constructing secure entrances at Oak Lawn and Knapp Elementary School. I want to point out those entrances are secure, but the purpose and the desire behind these goals was to actually construct a physical secure entrance so it wouldn't be reliant on a buzzer system. All the schools in the school district, with the exception of Oak Lawn and Knapp Elementary, not only have buzzer systems, but they also have secure entrances which lead into the office once someone is checked in during the school day. And then finally, creating a facility plan. That's on the bottom of the 5th pillar. That's a pretty big endeavor. That would require us to hire a firm to come in. And we are in our 4th year of the 5-year plan. So if we leave that on there, we're probably looking at, if not this year, certainly next year, hiring a firm to come in and can conduct a facility plan. So we wanted to point those out for the board and make sure that the board is aware that those are still in the plan. Finally, I want to give credit to Brian Seguin and our lead team, but Brian did a lot of the heavy lifting on it with the measurable goals. You can see that a number of those goals have been changed. A number of those goals were modified to reflect what we were able to glean from previous years. The pandemic certainly impacted some of the measurable goals, and we tried to set measures that, one, reflect the fact that we have different class sizes. In the original strategic plan, it just called for a certain percentage of growth, but that's hard to reflect if your class sizes change every year. I think these are written in a way that are more transferable for each class that may contain a different number of students. Also, we did modify them based on what we have seen over the last several years and what we think are realistic targets moving forward for the next 2 years of the strategic plan. The academic achievement goals, those were already approved by the board. I can't remember which month that was. Yeah, it was June or earlier. I think it was before the election. I think it was in the early spring. But anyway, those were already set, but a number of these other ones have been modified, and we're suggesting that the board consider these tonight. So any questions or suggestions?
Just a couple, Joe. Thanks, guys, I wasn't here last time, so I probably maybe missed something last time. In regards to the 2-year, 4-year college, highlighted in blue there, I totally agree, and I like that it has the 2-year, 4-year because we may be seeing a shift towards two-year programs for a lot of high-demand pieces. I'm wondering, is there additional trade-based or certification-based opportunities that we could add to that aren't a two-year degree, but are meaningful employment in our community? And the second piece I would love to see in there is something potentially regarding military participation. The military paid for a large portion of my education, and it was an incredibly great opportunity, and I know that there's a huge shortage right now of people wanting to serve. So again, and more of the employable skills, you go to the military, you learn how to drive bulldozers, that's a really good skill to have when you come out. Welders, things like that. So that was one thought on that, and my other thought or question was the other blue one with the facilities plan.
Could we
Yeah.
speak to the
Yep.
first one first?
Sorry.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Carl, because we had the same discussion at the administrative level. And one of the reasons why we left it in a more narrow focus to 2- and 4-year colleges is because of the reporting that's available. Certainly, the overall overarching goal of the pillar is to ensure that all students will be prepared for success upon graduation. And that success can be measured in a lot of different ways. And we do have it measured in a lot of different ways with our GX certificates, our STEM certificates, dual credit courses, participation rate in youth apprenticeships. And this college piece though, this 2- and 4-year college piece, that's specific to reports that we're able to get. So that's why it's narrowed. I don't know if there's another measure that, we didn't really think there was a real good way to provide a reliable measure on that one that could be useful for the strategic plan, but it's certainly not that we're trying to prioritize one avenue over others.
So the trade-based thing, that makes sense. That'd be hard to tease out probably. We kind of know though who's enlisted in the service when they're at graduation, right? I mean, that'd be an easy number to track.
So we know which ones have already signed up. That's usually one of those pieces. I think one of the things that if we want to go in this direction, that I would suggest be part of an action plan would be investigate what type of data we could pull, because we want to make sure that if we're trying to either start from a given point, move forward, that we're doing that in a concise and consistent basis. And if we're trying to figure out some type of baseline, that we have confidence in the data and the records that we have as well.
Well, I'm fine with it being off this year. Maybe we add it next year if we think through that.
And again, this is the 4th year of 5-year strategic plan, so maybe that's something we would consider moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree that it's something that we need to take a look at from a standpoint of what are some other data sources out there. Even like when we do the Ed for Employment report, the timing of some of those reports, even within the report that's published, there's a pretty good lag in some of that data from year to year too. So.
And you don't want the juice to cost more than the sweet.
Yep.
Right. So, or the sweet to cost more than the juice. Right? Yeah. So anyway.
What was the other one?
So with the facility plan, I guess what I wasn't clear on, is this brick and mortar stuff, or is this anything considered capital? Because sometimes things kind of crisscross in that, right? Like, we need new lights in the auditorium. Is that facilities plan, or would that type of stuff be in this plan?
I would say it's certainly possible that you could see some of that. I think more of that is included in some of the other goals and measurables though, with the long-range capital improvement plan. I know that that's something that we continue to look at. In fact, if you look at the measurable goals under Pillar 5, I think that's the first one that the board will review the existing long-term capital improvement plan by June 2023. So I would say that even though some of it could end up being put into the capital improvement plan, it's really more talking about bricks and mortar, looking at enrollment projections, programming needs. Again, I'm not certain that this is something that the board would want to prioritize at this point, but certainly something we can do.
Do we know what the cost is, Joe, for that type of assessment?
Charlie, you could probably give me a better estimate than I can come up with.
Depends on how deep you want to go. It can easily cost $30,000 to $50,000. Again, it depends on how deep you want to go. If you want to do just the hardscapes kind of thing, the brick and mortar, that's a little bit less expensive, but if you want to get into projections on enrollment, 10-year projection, those kinds of things, that gets a little bit more expensive.
And I would think that, I mean, the assessment cost isn't what I'm afraid of, but what I wouldn't want to do is spend money on an assessment of facility if we don't have detailed enough programming needs sorted out from the front line coming up to, you know, say, we need this type of thing, or this type of room, or this type of building. So
I actually wouldn't mind holding off on this one. I do think it's important to continue to look to the future, continue to plan for facilities. We held off previously with the pandemic, especially not knowing what enrollment was going to do and how it would rebound, and we had some ideas, but I think we saw that it rebounded pretty well. We do know that we have some areas, especially at the elementary level, where some rebalancing may need to take place. I think most of that we can handle through our attendance area exceptions. Perhaps may have to look at some of our elementary attendance boundaries at some point, but I think we have quite a bit of flexibility there. I think the recent referendum we did really updated our facilities to a much better level of what they were previously. So I think it's important always. I don't know if it would reach a high priority for me at this point in the plan, but we certainly can keep it in there if the board would like.
From my point of view, of course, this is what I do, so I'm kind of biased.
You think?
But I think that it's very important to do this because it helps you to look into the future, maybe a little bit further, and having someone that isn't here every day sees things that you kind of have a tendency to walk by because you're used to it. So I would suggest it into the near future, maybe not this year, but into the near future. I think it's important to have a plan like this so that we can see that 5 years or 10 years down the road, we need to be thinking about whatever it might be that needs to be replaced or fixed. And Kevin's done such a great job on the capital improvement plan, and that would be a part of this, but I think that there's a lot of other pieces that would play along as well that I just think are important.
The column that it is in is deliverable by the end of the plan. So keeping it in that column does not mean that it has to be part of this year's action plan. So having it continuing to have it in the plan and revisit it next year to determine whether or not it makes it into next year's work plan, I think would be reasonable. I would not recommend including it in this year's work plan, however. We have the solar project that is going or kicking off here shortly. The sports complex project is underway. We have some major LED upgrades that had supply chain issues that I know are going to be taking a lot of Kevin's time over the next 12 to 18 months. So I would rather prioritize those items in terms of our work plan. And frankly, the secure entrance piece too. I think that is a higher priority right now.
Joe, you said it, but I think it's important for people to understand on that secure entrance that it's not that entrance is open now at all. The difference is installing a system so that the person, in order to get into the building, would need to go through the office during school hours. So it is a secure entrance now. It's locked down, it's buzzed in, but they need to go to a different level, if you will.
Airlock.
Yes.
And similar to the other one, we don't have that as a recommended work plan item for the 22-23 school year, but we do think it makes sense to keep it on the list. I have been in discussions with Eric Atkinson, the Menomonie Police Department Chief. We are also looking at grant funding. There's still some very good grant funding available for school security, and that may help us with some of these projects that are in our plan. So similar to the previous one, I certainly, this one especially, would leave on the strategic plan and then decide next year whether or not we're ready to move forward with any kind of actual construction. You can see that in the annual action plans, we already have the plans. So that was one of the previous deliverables. Plans have been developed for reconstructing the entrances at all three of those buildings, Oak Lawn Middle School and Knapp. The middle school project has already been completed. That was prioritized for a number of reasons, including the fact that the front doors were in such rough shape.
One thing I guess question, when we were talking about the 2-year, 4-year college attendance, I don't know if it belongs in the work plan for this year, but it would be good to do some of that research that Brian talked about, so that for next year, you might have a better understanding of what data we could use to create a measurable goal for the future.
We could do that with that entire measurable piece in terms of matriculation. We could take that out of a measurable goal and add it to a work plan item and essentially develop a measurable goal this school year that could potentially be used moving forward. I think that would be a good recommendation.
So even though currently you could measure those that are going on to 2- and 4-year college, you pull them out and delay that measure to next year, is that what you're saying? Or potentially to next year?
Yeah, we could, and even that one, that's still in that old language of increase by 0.5% annually. That doesn't necessarily reflect some of the changes that we did in terms of class sizes and things that I mentioned earlier. Either way is fine with us, fine with me.
I don't know why we'd want to not track it if it's the one thing we can track.
Sure.
Adjust it next year with maybe a more comprehensive. That's just my opinion.
So keep the measurable goal as is, but then add a work plan item to expand how we measure matriculation of graduates.
I would agree.
See a lot of nodding heads. Okay. Do you want to check with Dave?
Yeah, we're just going to do that. Abe, I know you had some questions on a few of these. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I think you Charlie. Can you hear me okay?
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I kind of a question, I guess, on pillar 2. So this is a student social emotional wellness pillar. So we have this item, be a strong conduit for student mental health resources, creating a clear pathway between services and their strategic actions. And I think we're doing a really good job of that, but I guess one thing I've noticed in the breakdown of the action plan and the goals is that we see a way to kind of measure if that pathway is actually effective. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, I don't have a measurement in mind, but I'm kind of curious if there's a way to either follow up in a way that doesn't violate privacy with students who have been referred, or families I should say, that have been referred, to see if they got what they, if they actually got contact with a provider, or if there's some other way to kind of see that we're actually making a pathway to resources for students and families. So maybe an action item could be something like, develop a way to measure that, right? But I'm kind of curious what Joe and Sonia think about how can we actually make sure that this pathway is conduit to resources is actually effective, and not, maybe lead to dead ends that we might not be aware of.
Abe, thanks for the question, and thank you for giving us a heads up so Tony and I could have a chance to talk about this. Tony, do you want to maybe kind of summarize some of the discussion and some of the thoughts in terms of measuring student mental health referrals?
I think there's a definite possibility to measure or survey families to figure out barriers to receiving services. So whether it's they couldn't find a provider, or they don't have insurance, or the student no longer wants services, we can definitely do that if families are willing. I'm a little concerned about asking families if they are happy with their provider, because I think that then that enters into the privacy of that service with that mental health provider, and I don't think it's our job to evaluate mental health providers. So definitely I think we can look at barriers, and then in a way then that we are aware of what those barriers are, so maybe we can help reduce those barriers. But I'm just a little concerned about asking families if they're happy with their service provider. One, I don't think it's our business if they are satisfied with their service provider. It'd be like us asking, are you satisfied with your family practitioner? That's not really my business. So, but definitely barriers, because I think that's definitely something we try to help families with, is to reduce those barriers.
And I would follow up by saying the measurable goal that we have, and we struggled with this a little bit as a lead team when we were looking at these with the principals and directors a couple weeks ago and again last week. The measurable that we have right now in the plan is to maintain current partnerships and levels of student access to mental health services. We struggled with it because there is such a challenge right now with access, and we have such limited control in terms of access. I would suggest that our school district and students in our school district and families in our district have far more access than in a lot of other places around the state. And a large part of that is because of the partnership that we've been able to develop with Stout and the university here. But right now we're almost kind of in a holding pattern of trying to maintain what we have because we're seeing services really somewhat disappear and become even more competitive. So I don't know, Abe, if that answers your questions or if you have any other ideas or suggestions you'd like the board to consider with this.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Those are very helpful responses. I agree with Tony entirely. It's not our job to evaluate like the market of mental health providers. But I do think that the point Tony made is very good, that, you know, asking not for satisfaction, but like, was there a barrier? I think when I think back to the SLO report we had a few meetings ago, there's kind of this discussion of, well, you know, in some areas, you know, it might take months for somebody to get contact with an actual provider. Or as you just mentioned, Joe, like, you know, there's a high turnover and high demand for these services. And just simply knowing if we have a referral, you know, can they get like, do they actually make a phone, do the phone call actually go through, right? Could they make an appointment? Or if not, like, why not? I think, to me, that information would be super helpful to think about. As we think about how to make the system even, you know, better and more robust, I agree with you entirely. I think we have great access in our school. And I'm kind of curious how we can measure it and then kind of look at ways to improve it over time in terms of the actual, you know, getting that conduit going. So thank you.
I think that's a good idea, and I made a note here that when we look at work plan, that we include an action item to somehow identify those barriers, and I think that's some good direction that we can take off with.
You know, have you guys thought about maybe, you know, as population numbers change, you could say, do we maintain current partnerships? That's a yes or no, right? Last year we had 4 partners in providing mental health services. This year we have 3. We didn't. Or, right, that we can measure that even if it's a basic number. I'm wondering, is there something to the effect of number of available clinicians that we have a relationship with per a certain number of students in the district, so a ratio. So if our number of students drops and there's fewer counselors, that's fine if that ratio stays approximate. I don't know what the baseline is, but that would allow us to trend our own access internally, not necessarily compared to outside, but it would be a measurable regarding access being there.
Are you talking our school counselors?
A counseling resource. So if we have a student that has a need, and our solid process here is the conduit, and we say, here's the resources available. Whatever they get hooked up with, they get hooked up with, but the idea is the amount of resource we have available to our students staying the same or changing? Not just the number of partner organizations, but the number of per student counselors or whatever.
Are we not then setting a goal on something that we have no control
No,
over?
I agree that we don't have control over it, and I don't see that as a pass-fail, we screwed up item on here. I see it as if it has gone down, is there things we can do about it in the future, planfully next year, the year after?
I don't think it's a bad idea, I think it's changing a lot. I think our providers have the number of counselors available, I think, is a
Moving target.
yeah. I think it's gonna matter when you get that information from them. I think it'd be a tough one to measure.
Actually, during COVID, our partnerships significantly went down. Many of the providers, the local providers, stopped seeing new clients. So they stayed with what they had, they stopped seeing new clients, they lost therapists. And then now, last year, it actually went up, the number of partnerships that we had, but some of the agencies don't want to have school partnerships. So when you reach out to them, they will say, I don't have a therapist willing to go into a school, or we're not accepting new clients, so we're not taking school partnerships at this time.
Aren't a number of the agencies trying to fill vacancies as well?
Exactly.
No, I 100% agree. It's not something we can be 100% accountable for what the number is, but having it on there was a way to potentially keep it where we need to be adjusting. But you guys do a great job of that, so I was throwing out measurable ideas.
Do you think we can even get those numbers?
Well, I think in my last couple, my student mental health report, I do list our school partnerships in there that we had this, during that school year.
But in terms of how many therapists they have,
we don't determine how many therapists they have. And many times there is switching therapists. So we actually might drop an agency because we're not getting a consistent therapist coming in, and we know that that's also not best for kids to not know who the therapist is actually coming in to see them. So we've had some issues, and then we've asked for that partnership to be ended for school.
So those contracts don't stipulate X number of hours of, okay.
No.
If I can jump with a really quick point, I think the point Carl made about simply tracking the number, or maybe that's not the right number, but tracking something, I think as a general principle, if something is changing rapidly, that's all the more reason to figure out what you can measure so you can see that change, right? Changing from 1 to 2 to 3, or 1 to 20 to 30, or 1 to 10 to 100, right, is a bit different. And so whether or not we can affect a quantity, I tend to be I am a data scientist, so it's sort of my game, right? But if you think something might be changing, it's worth at least putting a number down so you can watch change and then think about what it means in your perspective.
I agree 100% in terms of maintaining our partnerships and tracking the number of partnerships we have. I just don't think getting into the granular level of how many therapists each of those partnerships may have is somewhere we want to go.
Yeah, and I agree after talking through them, for sure.
So our measurable probably works because our measurable is that we want to maintain the current number of partnerships. So if we lose a partner, we would try to add a partner.
Right.
Abe, did you have other questions?
Let me do one more, then I can kind of go on mute for a while. On pillar 3, our council workforce, I'm really happy to see the reestablishment of faculty and staff committees there. I just want to know, when we say reestablish, is that something we can, again, think about, how we know if a committee is, kind of reestablished in effect, in addition to just being on paper? Is it, making sure that they have, broad participation, or that there's involvement across different campuses or across different buildings? When we say reformulate committee, what do we mean by that in terms of it being an actual, entity of change or entity of action in the district?
Good question, Abe. I would say that we have many opportunities for collaboration, and some of them listed in the strategic plan include the QIC, Quality Improvement Committee, Diversity, Health, Medical, Energy Team, Program Reviews, Building Leadership Teams, and there's different processes that the district has for establishing those committees. At least the district level committees, I'll speak to. What we do is we solicit interest from staff, and we do have representation from the different levels and the different buildings. We also work with the principals if we have vacancies on the committee, or we receive principal recommendations. A lot of times we end up recruiting for vacancies on these committees. Also, the board members sit on a number of these committees. So I think in terms of measuring effectiveness or whether or not the committees are reestablished in an effective manner, I think you'll see that through the board member participation and through the different recommendations that come to the board throughout the year. Most of the recommendations come through one of the committees set up, whether it be the building leadership teams, program reviews, QIC, etc.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion, board members?
Yeah, the secure entrances, Joe, can you just share again why we wouldn't want to just do that as soon as possible? I'm not sure I took away what I needed to.
Sure. Well, again, the entrances in all of the schools are secure. And I know we've hit that twice already. The question is, do we want to initiate construction to make them even more secure through actually requiring entrance into the offices and such? For a couple reasons, I would say that it would make sense to wait and not immediately sign contracts or put these out to bid. One is I do think there's grant funding available. We are planning on working on a collaborative grant with the police department. So if we can obtain grant funding, I think that's an important piece. Also, I think it's worth studying a little bit more what the cost benefit is on some of these, especially knowing that we do have secure entrances already. Some of these would be some pretty big projects, and we have the plans, like I said, that's been developed. We have some estimates, but I guess in terms of prioritizing whether or not that's where the board would want to invest, I think is something that needs more study.
How old are the estimates?
A couple years. They were done in the strategic plan, and this is the fourth year, so I think they were done in year 2 maybe.
And as it currently stands, this is similar to the facility plan in that it's staying in our strategic plan, but it's not this year's action plan. Is that right?
Correct. As it is now.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is I think timing also matters. I mean, like I mentioned with the middle school, something had to be done with those doors. So it only made sense to not just replace the doors, but add security as we were doing that. I don't know that we're in that situation at the other schools as much. So I think that's also a difference. Some of the other schools were done through referendum. The high school, the high school, Downsville, thank you, River Heights, those were done through the referendum. And Wakanda was done as kind of a side project. It really didn't take much other than blowing out some bricks and adding a door. Whereas it would take a lot more out at Knapp. That whole office would need to be moved. Oaklawn would be a much more substantial project as well.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to make a general statement. I think many of your goals are pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
One in particular, and I know I was the person that one of the people that kind of asked for this one, but by the end of the 22-23 school year, 100% of SDMA students can identify an adult within the district who they can trust. Since trust is kind of a two-way street, I think that's going to be a tough one because you can do what you can do, but if the student just simply doesn't trust, that's going to be tough. But like I said, pretty aggressive.
Yeah, that's a good one, Charlie. And we also talked about that, and we didn't think it was okay to set a goal that wasn't 100% of kids. And that's one thing that we've talked about as a leadership team, and one thing I really appreciated the way this board has been, through initial evaluation processes and through our goal setting, is that this board has taken the stance from my perspective that let's set high goals, and absolutely let's do everything we can to meet them. But if we don't, let's look at it for opportunity for growth, and not a gotcha type of thing. And I just think that's a healthy atmosphere. I think our district has a healthy atmosphere for doing that, and I think we can all be encouraged. But we're going to work like crazy to try to achieve that. We want 100% of our kids to have someone in our district that they trust.
So we've made a couple of, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, looking at this, there's a lot of stuff that's been accomplished, when you see the strikeouts. And, even with COVID, I think we've done a very good job, of moving forward, and I think we've got a chance to keep moving forward. So I like what the B team did. I think it's a good thing, and I would like to leave the college in for this year, just that one, those goals, and then the others, like you said, I would agree that we could probably not put them on the work plan this year, but for maybe next year, but keep them in the plan.
So we've made a couple of recommended changes for you.
I think the recommended changes for the work plan, and that's going to be coming to the board over the next couple meetings. In terms of the strategic plan, I think it's ready. The board did not want to take anything out, and it sounds like the board is agreeable to the measurable goals that were developed. So I think as presented, we're in good shape.
So we have a motion and a second on the table. A last chance for making any changes, any recommendations, or if we hear none, let's go ahead and vote. Any thoughts? Last chance. All right, let's vote. Come on, just very fresh. Yes. Okay, Bill. All right, motion passes 7-0. So now moving on. Moving on to the student services report and the discussion items.
Okay, so Tony Kwiski, our Director of Student Services, she was here last meeting to give a report. Was it last meeting or 2 meetings ago?
I can't remember.
She was here recently to give a report on the initiatives with our student health, mental health resources and initiatives. And tonight there'll be a little broader report in terms of the annual student services report. Tony, go ahead.
All right, so this report kind of dives into some of the departments I oversee. The first one is special education. I would say that that's probably my largest department. Really, this year, we're embarking on kind of a 2-year self-assessment. So what every 5 years, we do a self-assessment looking at how it's more of our forms and are we following processes and procedure. So this year they're looking at 3 indicators. Like I said, indicator 14, post-school outcomes. That is a survey that we do in the summer. It is required that we do it this summer. In previous years, we've done it out of cycle, meaning it's not required, but it's information we gather, so we contact students with disabilities who have graduated to determine what they are doing. So that is in the process currently. Indicator 11, timely initial evaluations. That is just a reporting requirement. It's based on information in Skyward, and we push that information to DPI. And then to indicator 8, parent involvement. We will be doing this year a parent survey of students with disabilities, so we will be working on that. That is not out yet, though. As you can see, I listed kind of categories of disabilities that we serve students under. I also talk about parentally placed private school students. Currently, we have 2 schools that we have students with disabilities attending. Every summer around this time, I contact our private schools to determine what services they want to receive based on a calculation I do. We are required by DPI to provide equitable services, and that is an amount of money that is calculated, and we have to spend that amount of money on our private school students. Historically, it has always been speech and language that we have provided. I'm anticipating that that is going to be similar. So if a student would qualify maybe in needing another service, that is not necessarily a service we are required to provide. We might provide consultation services, but not direct services. So currently, right now, we do have a speech and language pathologist that spends, like, I think it's a day and a half in our private schools providing direct services to students that qualify. You can see our special ed count. Since I've been here, I think there's only been 1 year that we saw a dip, but that is progressively, we are seeing more and more students qualifying under special education, and you can kind of see some staffing that I have along with that. If you have any questions, please just jump in. I tend to ramble and then.
The 1.5, is that days per week, per pay period, per 2 weeks?
Per week.
Per week, thank you.
Yep. Section 504, so we provide services to students who qualify under Section 504, and they are considered regular education accommodations. Currently, we have 74 students who have a Section 504 plan. These can be based similar to a health plan, so many of these students have a health-related need that requires maybe for them to leave class early. It may be that they are frequently absent because they maybe need to have doctor's appointments. So there's different plans for that. Those are typically housed with our school counselors, and they are the ones that facilitate those plans and run those meetings. English language learners, you can see I kind of I broke down per building how many students we have and staffing that goes along with that, and the home languages that we see. Every year, I think those home languages slightly change. I'd say Hmong is our highest, and then Spanish the second. Every once in a while, we do get a language that we have not heard before, and sometimes we utilize Stout to help us with the translation. We reach out to them to see if they have a student that maybe speaks that language, or they know of a family member that speaks that language. Gifted and talented. We currently have 32 students identified under gifted and talented. Most of those students are in our middle school and high school. I did add, and it's called Rethinking Giftedness. If you haven't seen that video, I think it's kind of a neat video, a perspective of students who've been identified as gifted and talented. I think many times we focus our services on the area that they are gifted in, and sometimes we really need to rethink whether or not that's how we want to provide services. I'm not, I think sometimes we put labels on students that can have a negative side effect for that. I wish we wouldn't have to, even though I work in a world of labels. We work in special ed, and that requires a label. I wish we didn't have to put a label on a student in order for them to receive services. So this kind of highlights some of that with that. So if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend that you do.
I love that video.
Yeah.
It was really good.
How long is it?
It's not very long at all.
About 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe 5 minutes. Yeah, it's not very long.
I will
So
watch
yes.
And it's in here, it's in the.
Well, I just needed to budget my time.
Yeah.
Can In a nutshell though, could you share how do those 32 kids get selected? I don't understand.
So
that.
there is an evaluation, so a referral may come in from a family member, a teacher might refer, and so there is a referral that they go through. Our school psychologists to facilitate that referral. They do an intellectual test to determine that. They also look at their academic scores, how they're performing within the classroom setting. And so there is a bar that they need to reach in order to be identified as gifted and talented. So, yep. The next area is student health services. I gave you staffing, and then to give you an idea of some of the health conditions that our staff are working with. Also, bridging brighter smiles. I don't know if you're aware, so we have a dental program that comes in to help provide dental care to our low-income families. And this is some of the data from the Bridging Brighter Smiles. I think it's great that we have that program. Any questions, comments?
Good report.
Thank you.
You have a ridiculous amount of things in your ballpark.
Thank you.
I think.
I don't think they're ridiculous.
Well, it's a ridiculous amount, like it's a lot. And
In volume.
in volume, and that, you know, every unique learner we do have has
Yep.
this huge array of needs. Some of these needs we're trying to support outside of our own school and other schools. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah, I don't think many people know that we had 273 students enrolled in the dental program. 370 students last year received screenings or cleanings. 528 received fluoride varnishes. 576 teeth were sealed. And yeah, there's a lot of services being provided in our schools.
Yep.
And most likely, all of the kids who received that, had it not been for that, would have received
Nothing.
zero care,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Oh, I just had a quick question about the English language learners numbers. And this is just curiosity. Is it the case that most students are kind of graduating out of being in ELL by the time they get to middle school or high school?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So students, every year they take what's called an access test. And that it gives them levels on their language, on their English language. So some students do progress out of that, and some students will stay English language learners. The hope is that their language, it will go up, increase, but some never necessarily graduate from English language learners. We still have students at our high school level. Some has to really do with their home, like what's the language that's spoken in the home. We are still seeing many, even Hmong families who parents are still speaking only Hmong in the home. And so that may impact their language at school.
I was curious because the numbers, the breakdown by building makes it seem like the number of English language learners is increasing quite a bit when you look at the difference between the cumulative elementary schools and then what's in the middle school or high school.
Yeah.
Is that, do you think that's the case, or is?
No, I would say, you know, like our middle school is 3 grades, where our high school is 4 grades. So you kind of have to also look at that.
Sure.
And where the students are located are elementary. River Heights has historically been having the most English language learners at River Heights.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you for that, and on to the seclusion and restraint report.
Okay, so this is an annual report that is required by DPI to review our seclusion and restraint. So the first off, every year I speak with staff, particularly our special ed education teachers, and talk about seclusion and restraint. There are specific procedures they need to follow. Of course, seclusion and restraint should be used only as a last resort, and that other strategies should be tried first before you move into a seclusion and or restraint. for students with disabilities. After the second use of seclusion or restraint, they're required to hold an IEP meeting to discuss positive behavioral supports in order to maybe reduce the likelihood that you will have to use a seclusion and or restraint. And so the first table is our use of physical restraint. As you can see, a couple of years ago, like 3 years ago, we moved from reporting like kind of district-wide data to reporting it based on school. So that's why it's listed there. The first 3 columns are total incidences. The next 3 columns are the number of students involved in those incidences. And then the last 3 are of those students, how many are identified with an IEP. So as you can see that. So the first table is physical restraint, and the second table is seclusion. When we look at that, the report that gets filed, anytime this happens, a teacher is required to fill out a report. That report goes to me. That report also gets sent home to parents. And so when I look at that, there's like a time, they have to indicate how much time were they in a seclusion, how much time were they in a physical restraint. I would say it's most like our physical restraints, it is usually in seconds, calculated in seconds instead of necessarily minutes. Seclusion might be a little longer. And it's anything. So even if it's a second that let's say a student is lunging at another child and you grab them and hold them, even for a second, that is considered a physical restraint. Same thing with seclusion. Let's say we have a younger child who wants to run out of the building and we block that door, that is considered seclusion. So we are required by law to report that and write that down. And then nonviolent crisis intervention, we have 2 train the trainers, Bill Freeman and Tara Ryder. And I kind of let you know per year how many staff have been trained. Staff usually get trained every 2 years. They do some de-escalation. Most of the training is focused on de-escalation. And then the second part of the training is focused on the holds. During COVID, we focused less on that training because that training actually requires you to touch each other. And so during COVID, we didn't provide that training to staff because of COVID. We didn't. You spend quite a bit of time touching your partner and practicing the holds. So, any questions?
Just one.
Yep.
I know we often have a school resource officer, at least at the high school,
Yes.
around. If there's a fight while the school resource officer is there and they break it up, does that go into this report, or is that
They're required to report that to me as well.
Okay, and that's in these numbers?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any school employee that on school grounds, including our resource officers, are required to report seclusion and or restraint.
Any other questions? Again, thank you for that.
I got
Oh, go ahead, sorry, Mark.
a quick one. I know this table is showing 3 years, but are these numbers low? Because it seems like
I don't think that they're low.
like just going back to maybe other years or whatever. It just seems like from what you described with the restraint and seclusion, it's just like, gosh, if you grabbed a kid that like jumped out of line, you'd have to report that, right?
It depends probably how you grab them. So if, many teachers will use let's say a student jumped out of line and you walked up to the student and your presence being there gets them back into line, you would call that anything. That's a positive behavioral support strategy. But if you're having to grab them and wrap your arms around them to prevent them from doing something, that would be a restraint. And we all looked at things, we have to look at things kind of differently. Younger children, let's say a young child, There are some incidences that we use holds as a strategy for calming, a sensory strategy for calming. And if we're using that, it's not considered a physical restraint. If it's done in conjunction with like our physical therapist, who we're using that as a calming strategy. So I don't think the numbers are low. Every year, I'm hoping people are reporting, you know, I'm relying on teachers to report what they are doing with their students. And if they have done a physical restraint, I tell them they are required to report that.
And I think perhaps what Mark is saying too, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you have 3,400 students for 175 days, to have 35 total incidences where there's a restraint used, and 13 students involved, I think it does show what a terrific job our staff does in terms of using all sorts of other strategies beyond some sort of restraint or seclusion. So from that standpoint, I do think they're low, but I think they're low for good reason.
And it's used, it can only be used as a last resort. So one of the examples, like during the training, we'll use is, let's say, students on the playground. So students on the playground doesn't want to come in from the playground, because that happens. Young kids will want to stay on the playground. If the student is just playing on the playground, you are not to go out there and touch the student and hold them to bring them back in the building, even though they could be out there for hours. It is an inconvenience for the teacher. It's an inconvenience for us because the rest of the day is going on. But the student is not in danger. But if the student is high up and jumping off things and potentially could hurt themselves or gonna run into the playground, that changes that level of risk for that student. And that might then bring you to needing and letting you do that. And our teachers, when we go through the training, we always say, we're gonna teach you these skills in hopes that you will never use them. Because that's the whole idea of the training, is that, yeah, we might teach you how to use the holds, but the first half of the training is all de-escalation. So what can we do so that we never get to this area? And that's really what our teachers try to do. I would say our teachers very much try to never use a restraint.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for that. On to bullying and harassment.
Okay, so I kind of gave you some information on, I think the school board statement of bullying that you guys created that, you might know a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, that the school board created that statement. I also kind of go over the district harassment form and the online reporting form. There's a variety of ways students, staff, parents can report bullying. One is using that kind of online form. It could be reporting, so using that online form, making a phone call to the teacher or the principal or the school counselor or to myself. Maybe sometimes they happen in person. A student might come down and talk to somebody in the office to let them know. Gaggle is another reporting way. So students have access to, it's like a phone number and an email address that they can anonymously report bullying and harassment. Also our Gaggle system. So let's say a student is emailing another student and there's some language in there that's indicating that this might be bullying. That also then gets reported to us so we can investigate that. We do have a website dedicated to bullying, the Bullying Prevention Zone. Other school board policies that I listed on there, kind of addressing harassment and bullying. And then, so as far as curriculum, our elementary, with our second steps, we also purchased the bullying component of that curriculum. And then also in our buildings, so like the middle school, we'll do an assembly and they'll, Mr. Betcher will explain how students can report bullying or harassment.
Tony, if I could jump in just for a second. Just to give a little history on this, bullying is something that has always been important, and it was really emphasized in the school district about 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was actually the end of our previous strategic plan, and that's where the board updated policy, called for this annual review of bullying policies and reporting bullying incidences. That's when the website was updated and all these tools were provided for reporting. Despite all that, we all know that bullying is something that will always be a challenge for schools and for other entities. Even though we have all these different reporting mechanisms, it's still critical that when people see something, they say something. And when people say something, whether it be through a formal report or through talking with a teacher or building principal or other staff member, this policy goes into effect and the reporting occurs. Now, there are some times when students may report to their teacher that so-and-so bullied me on the playground or something like that. And sometimes through investigation, it turns out that it wasn't bullying as defined by the school board policy. It may be a different behavior infraction or maybe something where some reteaching needs to occur. But I think it's important that we do track the number of bullying incidences that we have. I think Tony did a good job of that. There are non-discrimination requirements that are required to be reported to the state, and those are reported in Tony's report as well. But as you can see, again, kind of like Mark said with the seclusion and restraint, when you talk about 3,400 students over 175 days of school, generally the behavior of our students is quite good, but we also know that anytime there is an incident, we need to make sure we have proper processes in place, and I know that our building principals, our faculty and staff take this very seriously. Tony, anything else about the data that you'd like to point out?
No, unless somebody has a question.
Oh, I was going to ask a question about the reports. It seems like there are a lot of ways for students, like I guess we'll just say older students, right? Students who are able to use a computer or figure things out or advocate for themselves a little better or have a lot of different avenues for reporting an incident. And I guess I'm wondering about younger students, I guess mostly I'm wondering about parents. I think as a parent, we've talked a little bit about this. I think it's not controversial to say it can be hard to find things on our website. And I wonder about like the ease of accessibility of the reporting form, right? When we're thinking about our youngest students who are pretty much reliant on a parent to do that and figuring out how to access that. And I say this as someone who's like heard a lot of stories from other parents at my kids' schools or people I know, friends of mine, and I guess I would like to see a way that form is more well known about. Like I know it's mentioned in the student handbooks, but I don't think that folks realize how to find it when they need it.
You mean the online?
Well, whether it's the online or the paper version, yeah.
Rachel, that's interesting, and I think our principals have done a really good job, and you're right. I think the younger the child is, probably the more challenging it can be and the more reliant they are on the adults, whether it be the teachers or parents or neighbors or older siblings. When I go to the website though, and I go to the search and I just type bullying in, we get 19 results just like that. So other than putting it on the front page of the website, I'm not sure how much more accessible we really could make it. I mean, I realize when someone wants something that people want it, they want it now. But if we put everything on our front page, you won't be able to find anything either.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest putting it on the front page. You certainly don't want to overly crowd the front page. I guess I'm wondering about like non-website ways of finding it. Again, because the website has so much information and can be difficult to navigate. Like, are there ways that it could be more, or just that folks could be more aware that like you could get it from the school offices, or that there are ways to ask a teacher about it or something?
I think having good rapport with your child's teacher is probably the number one thing for bullying or any other issue in the classroom or in the school. I know all of our teachers are well-versed in how to report and how to direct those services. Tony, do you have any
And
thoughts on that?
You know, maybe this is because it got taken away because of COVID and us trying to reduce. I know before COVID going into schools, the forms were like on the counter of the office. And I don't know if that now has kind of gone away as we're trying to maybe eliminate, as we were during COVID, trying to eliminate, you know, that space.
You know, what could really speak to this would be the principals. You know, Mike is here representing the elementary, Bard Middle School, and Casey. Do either of you three have any comments in terms of how you make people aware of how to report bullying?
Sure, yeah. Do you just want us to speak from here,
Or yeah, or you come up to Brian. Either way, just stand up, yeah, or come up front. You can use Brian's microphone.
Sure.
Or Brian, you just give it either way. If you want to sit down. Or Casey, you're welcome to as well if you have anything to add to Mike.
Yeah, and just hearing the questions about younger kiddos, I think that's a very valid question because you're right. As far as being able to advocate for themselves, that can be a little more challenging. I know we rely heavily on that interpersonal relationship that the kiddos have with their classroom teacher. Our teachers do a phenomenal job of reaching out to parents and letting them be aware of that too. And I was able to speak with our other building principals at the elementary level too. So just some of the things that we do at the beginning of the year, we make it very clear with the students. Like I know in my building, we have an all-school meeting the very first week of school, and we actually go through a presentation about bullying, and we talk about it with the kiddos and you know, appropriate language that they can understand. And really, you know, for them, the point of contact is to know, go talk to your teacher, talk to an adult that you trust in the building, talk to your parents, you know, whoever you need to talk to, let us know. In addition to that, we also make sure that our staff has professional development on the bullying process and the process for reporting bullying. That way they're aware of it too. That way if parents do have a question on what that process is, they can effectively relay that. Because we do know that the number one point of contact for an elementary student is going to be that teacher, in all likelihood. We still have the forms available in the office, so if people say, hey, I would really like to have a bullying and harassment form, secretaries give it to them right away. So we do have those supports available for them. Other items that we try to do with communication, in our student handbooks, we developed a behavior matrix in there, which really helps parents to understand. It once again outlines what is bullying in terms of policy, and it ties back to the SDMA policy. The matrix also explains kind of what consequences would be expected in a bullying situation. And also is re-emphasized in the Student Bill of Rights, which is also in the handbook. In addition to that, you know, just moving forward, I think the things that we talked about, improving our practices that we're looking forward to, because obviously we've been doing a lot of planning for next year. I think one of the items that we really want to do is, you know, because we do a lot of lessons with our students in terms of social and emotional learning, we really want to emphasize to parents, hey, these lessons are going on in the classroom. Letting them know that this week your kiddo's going to be learning about this. Maybe this is something you can carry that over to home too and have further conversations as well. So trying to really build those connections there too. And the hope being that if it's a conversation in school, if it's a conversation at home, it'll really help the kiddos to be able to advocate for themselves.
Now with the older kids, I know one of the improvements we made a few years ago was some people didn't want to make a report and be identified. So while we have the forms and while we certainly encourage people to talk to the principals, school counselors, teachers, we also do have the anonymous reporting available through the website, which may be more applicable to the high school and middle school. Not necessarily though, we do have some, especially older elementary students that may utilize it at some point. Bart or Casey, do you guys have any additional comments about how bullying is addressed at the middle school or high school?
I can jump in first here and then turn it over to Bart. So we do new student orientations in August. It's coming up here pretty quick, and in that we have all of our new students, which is mostly our incoming freshman class, and during that we'll talk about how to report bullying and harassment, what it looks like, different avenues that students have, that availability piece to do that. We have first day with our freshmen on August 31st. Part of that day will, again, emphasize those reporting mechanisms and what that bullying and harassment looks like. We also then kind of repeat that the following day, the first day with all students as well. We have a link program which takes roughly 60 to 70 of our juniors and seniors and partner them up in groups of 2 with groups of 10 of our freshmen. Within that program, they talk about appropriate behavior, trying to create some positive relationships. So although bullying and harassment isn't specifically talked about all the time within that group, it's a way to hopefully create positive relationships to avoid some of those negative behaviors. In our Intro to Social Studies class and health classes, we have a review of the handbook and Intro to Social Studies, which we'll take a look at, like what Mike was saying, with the Student Bill of Rights and just a lot of different components, including how to report bullying and harassment in there as well. Health courses, we bring in our student services members, and they will touch on a variety of topics, including harassment and healthy relationships. In early October, we do an all-school through our Mustang Monday piece, where we'll teach and show again how to report. We also talk about what this could look like and what are some signs of some unhealthy relationships during that time as well. We promote inclusion on the 14th of October, which is the Day of Unity. So I feel like we do quite a bit already. Like Mike said too, we have online reporting. We also have paper copies in all of the administration's offices. So there's quite a few ways in which kids can report that, talk to us, and we're trying to make that as big a focal point as possible so that people feel as comfortable as possible too.
And perhaps the most expert in terms of dealing with bullying, unfortunately, it seems that middle school aged is, and bullying can happen with adults. I mean, geez, we see it on social media every day. But middle school age, a lot of times is more susceptible for these kinds of behaviors. So maybe the mayor of Bully Town, Mr. Betcher, well, what do you have?
Well, I think maybe one of the things, Rachel, we do at the middle school is in our newsletter, we send out quarterly to information to parents so they can know ways to reach out. Because a lot of times, one of our main goals at the middle school is the goal that you talked about today, Charlie. We want to have every student feel like they have an adult in that building that they can go to and trust. And I think you see from, it might look a little negative, but we have students report bullying, and we're on it. We address it with our counselors, with principals. But our cares, I think, is extremely important. It's that small group of students that have a teacher that they build a relationship with throughout the year. We at the middle school do all of the other things with the harassment policies. I won't repeat everything that the elementary and high school did. But one thing we knew we're going to try this year, because we recognize we need to continue to do a better job. We're going to add the LINK program. It's very similar to what the high school's doing with middle school. So our 8th grade students are going to be mentors and some leaders to some of the 6th grade students, and they'll be involved in the classrooms to try to be buddies. And if you're a buddy with someone, you're not going to bully those kids. You're going to try to show them good behaviors, and we're hoping that that's going to have an impact. We're sending a team, Mr. Anderson and I, counselors, our school psychologists, and we have 5 other teachers are going to the Dallas to the PBIS RTI convention in August to really come home with some best practice too for addressing behaviors. But yeah, I won't go through. We do everything else. We also have assemblies, and with COVID we had to do the small little group, but the principals would be making sure we're going over the policies and the proper ways to let us know, or let your teacher know, or let a parent know if bullying is going on.
But despite all these efforts, we as a district fully recognize that when a child is feeling like they're being bullied, that's a huge deal. It's a huge deal for the child, it's a huge deal for the parents, it's a huge deal for the family, it's a huge deal for us. So we're not just up here giving lip service saying, well, we do this, this, and this, and this. We know that the most important piece is that if a child is having a problem, that we act on it. And I'm very confident that our teachers, our support staff, our principals, everybody takes this very, very seriously. So It's been a area where I think schools have received criticism in the past. Not just Menomonie, I think it's pretty common actually that you see this kind of criticism. I'm not saying that it's unwarranted. I do think that many important improvements have been made. At the same time, I think if people really knew how much effort is being put into this, I think most people would be pretty impressed. So, principals, thank you. Any other questions from the board on bullying tonight?
Less of a question, more of an observation. Do we have trends of the question related to bullying from the parental survey? I know you guys talked about it last time when I was gone, but in looking through that, it's kind of an interesting pattern that as the kids get older, the satisfaction of the parents with what we're doing about bullying goes down, like literally level by level. 4K, 100% happy, and then it's 70s to 80s in elementary, 65 in middle school, 62 in high school. But then there's a huge bump in the question. I have at least one staff member I feel comfortable with contacting when I have an idea or concern. So parents saying, I have at least one person I can contact. It's almost a 20-point gap. 62% were satisfied with the bullying at the high school. 79% of parents said they had someone they could contact. So interesting to me that it sounds like strong relationships, yet parents aren't quite where they want to be with it. It seems like a great opportunity for those parents to keep working with our staff. And I don't see this as a negative. I really am curious about what you guys can bring back from the conference, because what really happens is where the rubber hits the road, right? It's not anything else, but when that kid's having trouble and your team member is working with them, that matters. But do we have trends on that question?
No, we don't have trends. I think that's something I'd be interested to see. We have not done this family survey like this before.
Okay.
I will say, anecdotally, I'm probably right in the middle of it, having a sophomore son. I don't know if I'm a helicopter parent or what, but it's hard to let go. And we just talked about that at the elementary level. I think the parent is probably the biggest advocate. Whereas at the high school, the students are learning to work through some things on their own a little bit. And even if it's not on their own, the parent probably isn't in most cases as instrumental as they would be at the elementary school and probably the middle school as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's reflected in that number a little bit as well. Also, the relationship between parent and child changes quite a bit. You know this, Carl, which I'm learning and having having a hard time with myself. But no, I think we all probably go through that, I'm guessing.
I think my point in mentioning the parent data is that it wholeheartedly supports any efforts that we're doing and that you're doing to continue to work on this.
Abe, did you have a question on this one as well? Abe, did you have a question on this?
Yeah,
there we go.
Thank you. So I guess my question is kind of thorny. I'm more curious how the district administrators handle it. I think some cases in middle school and high school, there is sometimes a perception, whether it's correct or incorrect, depending on the age and all the complicated parental situations we've been discussing, where a student feels, again, rightly or wrongly, that they've been bullied or consistently singled out by a teacher or a staff member, which I feel like the reporting situation in that case is a lot more complicated. It involves both HR and, kind of trying to flip out what's actually going on. So I'm kind of curious how situations like that are handled, where, a student either reports or suggests that a staff member or a teacher might, be the one who's kind of picking on them in one way or another.
Well, Abe, I think that's a good question. What I would say is that I don't know if bullying would necessarily be the situation very often for something like that. Not that it couldn't be. But like you mentioned, if there was a complaint about a staff member, whether it be relationships with students or any other thing, that would be handled through the HR department and with the staff member's immediate supervisor. I would say that anything like that would be very infrequent, but certainly would be covered through our bullying policy and our non-discrimination policies. Sam, is there anything to add?
No, I think what's important, like you said, is involving the immediate supervisor and making sure that person is involved along with myself and working through what's in front of us, yeah.
Abe, did you
Yeah,
have
thank
any
you.
further on?
I think it's a really good policy, and I think this is one of those situations where, from a student's perspective, from a child or student's perspective, it's not always clear what the difference is. Because from the student's perspective, say you've got, someone in middle school, they might feel they're experiencing bullying from a peer, but for whatever context reason, could be correctly or wrongly, might think that, if a teacher doesn't stand up for them, or if a staff member kind of sees it and lets it go by, or writes a report, later, the student might feel like that's a kind of, a bullying situation and not know where to direct their concern. And so I think this kind of, I'm raising this something ties back to Rachel's question a while ago about how do things get reported, and do people know, what the right avenues are for different types of situations. I think, these situations are always a question of perception and, perception versus fact, which is very tricky, of course. But I think these are situations where parents or students might be most confused or frustrated about how to proceed.
Any other questions, comments? Amy?
I was looking at the different categories for non-discrimination on your compliance report, and through the years, it's kind of all over the place, but when I look at 21-22, it seems like there's been a lot less compared to the other years, and I think that's very telling, provided that things are being actually reported. What I'm most impressed about, though, is they went, well, it was 2, 7, 6, 5, and then 1 on the sexual orientation. And I remember that the gender support plan was enacted, or we came up with that in 2018, I believe. And so I'm thinking that might have been something that's really helping that population from being bullied or harassed. That's all.
Anything else? Thank you, gentlemen. Especially thank you, Tonya, for all 3 of your reports this evening. And as I forget how Carl mentioned it exactly, but the plethora of things that you work on. There you go. All right. All right, and moving on to the timeline review for the appointing a new board member. So attached, you have the timeline that was presented at the last board meeting. I don't believe anything changed. So we are at waiting the the deadline for applications at this point. I guess I would like to ask, you want to?
I was just going to say the applications are due August 3rd.
Right. I guess the question that I have of you, of fellow board members, is how do we want to proceed and how do we want to fill out this timeline, if you will? Do we want to have a special board meeting after the 3rd to try to go through the names that we get and try to narrow things down and get someone appointed as quickly as possible? Or do we want to wait until the next regularly scheduled board meeting, which coincidentally is the same evening as the annual meeting? So I guess, any thoughts there? What do you folks think?
There's still a meeting of the first meeting in August.
I did, yes. I'm sorry. I did.
There's still the first meeting in August.
There is the first meeting in August. That's correct. So we could go there right away.
And that would be done in closed session, right?
But there are some people that have said that they will not be at the first meeting in August the 8th. That was one reason why I said that. I believe, Carl, you were one of them?
Yeah.
I thought that was this meeting that people had.
There was 2. That was Dominique and Abe for this meeting. And then remember we said we'd check with Carl afterwards, and Mark, I think, was absent from that last one as well. And so Carl will be absent from the 8th.
Is Carl the only one?
I'm sorry?
Is Carl the only one?
The only one that I'm aware of.
Okay, I still think everybody should be here. I'm not trying to say, that we should just Carl.
I guess
Either way you could call it, well, I guess close session, we don't do that, never mind.
I may be in a place where calling in may not work, most likely. Otherwise, I would consider that, but I don't feel comfortable to commit to that and leave everyone hanging.
Well, it's closed session and we don't have to.
I certainly would like to be part of the conversation, obviously.
I was just gonna add, I'd have a preference for scheduling an additional meeting over extending the length of time of the annual meeting. I think that would make more sense.
Anybody else have anything to add to that, or?
My take is that I think it's important kind of decision.
We lost you, Abe.
Oh, sorry, am I still there?
Now you're.
Better now.
I'm sorry, so I'll speak louder. I think it's important that we're all there as much as possible for this decision, and to have such a big impact on how the board operates. And we want everyone to feel like, we as a group have chosen someone from the candidates who is going to, be, part of this board, like all together as a whole. And I am totally happy, if necessary, having an extra meeting, if that's what it takes to get us all together.
I think
I'd also like to get them before the annual meeting, because I think the annual meeting might already be quite long. So that's my take.
I think that I would prefer to have a separate meeting if he cannot attend. I think, we all agreed at the onset of this year that the board meetings would be the second and fourth Monday of the month. We all know what the schedule is. We already have semi-postponed this because 2 people couldn't make it tonight. So I think it's important to move forward, but timely, since we did postpone this once. So I would be open to having a separate meeting prior to the 8th, if Charlie would like, or not Charlie, Carl would like to review the applications. But I think it's important that we know what the schedule is and that we make time to be here. I know the new board members may have had previous vacation planned and things like that, but this is the schedule, and if you can't be here, then you don't get a vote, kind of a thing.
I would go for that, except for the fact that I'm going to be on vacation next week, the 1st through the 5th. And of course, I always try to do my vacations. I've had perfect attendance except for 2 personal times in all my 15 years. So I always try to do that. And so, of course, next week I took off because I didn't think there were going to be any meetings.
And we don't, the meeting doesn't have to happen before the 8th. It could happen after the 8th as well, so.
Carl, are you gone all of the week of the 8th?
I would be available starting that Wednesday.
Okay.
Correct.
So since we were absent one board member and Abe is on the phone, maybe we should pull the board away from this meeting to try to come up with a meeting day that would work. We already know that Amy's not available that week before, and when Carl would be available, and then after that, to try to set up a time where we could meet that following week maybe. Does that make sense? A preference is, any preference to day of week or time of day?
Monday.
Monday is best, okay. Could be the following Monday possibly.
The 15th?
But- Yeah, just Monday. Okay.
What time are you thinking?
Any special time of day for anyone works best?
I can make anything work, so whatever.
As long as I know ahead of time.
Right, and that's, as long as I've got notice, I can make it work. Okay. We'll send out a poll to see who and when, what dates would work best. Try to get something going. I prefer myself to have it done before the annual meeting as well, if we can.
Would the board be interested in postponing the entire meeting on the 8th? If we're gonna meet again on the 15th or before the annual meeting? I don't mind coming both nights, but I don't think the agenda for the 8th is gonna be that long.
I think that's a good idea.
Like, I can tell you, I didn't think the agenda was going to be that long, and we're almost 2 hours in, so I I think this is kind of the norm. And there's gonna-
If we can be efficient.
We also need to.
Well, I completely agree with that, but I don't want it to also run into the kind of.
I would agree with that.
When we were doing the evaluation, I think by the end of that first night, we probably met longer than we should have. I think people were pretty tired.
I would still prefer to meet longer versus meet twice.
I would too. I would agree with that, but now Dominique and I don't know, Abe are both available on the 15th because they're not here.
That's what we're gonna find out.
But regardless, if it's the 10th, 11th, 15th, 16th, would board members prefer to have one meeting? That's what I need to know.
Yes.
We also need to take consideration when we're thinking about the timeline is if we decide we want to interview candidates. You know, we want to look at the paperwork, but we might have 2 or 3 that we think are really good. We might want to go out and interview them before we vote. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about the timeline.
I think it's also important to adhere to the schedule that we did set, planning things ahead so that we don't run into this issue going forward.
Well, the challenge for me, Angie, is I wasn't here at the meeting and didn't know we'd lost a board member till I got back from the scheduled vacation that was planned 7 months ago. So, you know, if the board needs to meet without me, I guess I would totally understand that, but
It's not just you, I mean, it's happened this week too. I mean, you weren't here. We've had, it's not just you.
I think especially for this decision, it's important, I think that we have as many board members as possible without, you know, going too far. But I think that if it means changing a meeting date, I don't see that as a big deal. Any other questions?
and I certainly appreciate the flexibility of the board to accommodate, I really do.
Any other questions or thoughts on the timeline? So expect an email in the next couple of days asking for when you're available. See if we can get it down to one meeting and then essentially skip the 8th and move to the 15th or something like that.
Yeah, and I will need to double check with the directors and also make sure there's no legal issues with not having to meet on the 8th, but I think should be fine, but I'll double check.
All right, anything else on that? Okay, review extracurricular contract requests. Have a report in the attachment. Any questions, comments on that?
This doesn't require an action.
It does not, it is in the discussion items.
More informational than anything.
I guess one tiny question without dragging out the meeting is why does the morning aqua size person make more than the afternoon aqua size person? Is there a qualification thing or?
Years of experience perhaps?
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Kind of a market thing, okay.
All right, any other questions, comments on that?
I make a motion to adjourn, please.
Second.
Okay, let's slow your roll just a little bit. The next item on the agenda is the next meetings.
Oh, sorry.
So we don't need to go into that in great detail, but we should cover it since it's on the agenda. Any questions or comments, thoughts?
Charlie, I think it's a good thing to remind people that on August 22nd, the board is planning to meet at 5 o'clock because the annual meeting begins at 6 o'clock, and both of those meetings will be at the high school. I know we're going to meet again before then, but I think it's important to make sure we promote that.
Thank you.
Okay, now,
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
motion by Amy, seconded by Mark. We are adjourned.
Thank you.